Japan's government wants families to move out of the crowded capital Tokyo and has significantly boosted a one-time grant to kick things along. It's now worth 1 million yen per child, which is about $7,500 US. Now, the incentive is part of an official push to breathe life into declining towns and villages. A whopping 30% of Japan's population now lives in Greater Tokyo. Tens of thousands of people move there each year, hollowing out other parts of Japan which have ageing populations. Let's get more details now on this from DW NewsAsia reporter Michelle Stockman. Michelle, great to have you here. So why is the Japanese government doing this?
Japan is facing a demographic crisis. So big cities like Tokyo are a magnet to young people because of their high earning opportunities and also educational opportunities. On top of that, Japan faces a aging population and also a declining birth rate. So with that internal migration to big cities, the small towns and villages that those people are leaving from are dying out. And what that looks like is basically schools where there are no students, where a farmer might wonder, who's going to take over my farm when I decide to retire? Or streets lined with shuttered businesses. And in fact, I spoke to an American man who is married to a Japanese woman, and they've lived in Japan for a number of years in Tokyo. He's actually semi-retired, able to work remotely, and he and his wife decided to make the leap, to move from Tokyo to the countryside. And during that research, it became very apparent to him just how urgently local officials in small towns like the one where he moved to are looking for people to take over businesses and keep their towns alive.
There are lots and lots of local businesses that do not have successors. And as long as you have the basic business skills, some experience, the language capability, you can actually apply to take over someone's original business. Now, you won't do it turnkey. It won't be right overnight. What will happen is most likely you'd have to spend at least 6 months, maybe a year, kind of learning from the original owner. And it might turn out to be a fantastic experience. Then you can literally take over an existing business. When we were contemplating coming down here, although I wasn't really interested in doing that, the local government authorities were very interested to see if I could take over someone's local business. So should be possible.
Mark Kennedy there speaking to us a bit earlier from Japan. Michelle, what do families have to do to qualify?
So couples or single parents with children under the age of 18 qualify. They have to have a job in the new town, and also they have to stay for 5 years. Otherwise, they have to pay the money back. So no backsies. You really have to stick it out. And, the point is, though, are people actually taking advantage of these subsidies? Well, the carrot is actually sweeter. Families who do have a new job in the location can actually qualify for up to 3 million more yen, which is equivalent to around $22,000. So we're talking about potentially tens of thousands of dollars to move to a new place, but you really have to have that job figured out. You have to either start a new business, take over a business, or be able to work remotely.
And how many families have decided to take this quite big leap, Michelle?
Well, this scheme has existed since 2019. The subsidy for each child was lower then, so that's why they've boosted it now, because they want more people to participate. But if you look at the numbers, just about 1,500 families have participated in the 3 years that it's existed. And in the big picture of Greater Tokyo, which is a population of 35 million people, that's just a drop in the bucket. And, there may be some families who want to get away from the crushing expectations of childcare and long work hours in Tokyo, high cost of living, and go to nature and enjoy that. But the big question is, financially, can people swing it? And going back to Mark, he and his wife decided, yes, we can swing it. They actually didn't have kids who moved with them, so they didn't get the subsidy, but they were able to get other subsidies to move there and help finding housing. And he joined me in an interview while on a break from his day at the day spa. So, he's loving life. He and his wife say they have not looked back.
Well, I'm not a country boy originally, but this is a beautiful part of Japan. So we're right near the sea. Also, there are mountains, and there are lots of hot springs. This particular area is in the adjacent prefecture to where we live, but both have lots and lots of hot springs, so it's really close to nature. we literally moved from the middle of Tokyo to the countryside. So it was a pretty abrupt change, but it's great. The pace of life is a little slower here, and yet we're not too far removed from Tokyo. I go up there for a part-time role about once every month or 6 weeks, and it's really easy. It's only an hour and a half plane ride, so it's pretty close. But everything's better down here. It's less expensive. The quality of life is higher. The food is really good, and we can grow basically all the vegetables we need. So we don't really buy vegetables anymore at the supermarket. We just buy meat and fish. One of my sons really likes to fish. So when he comes to visit, he literally goes out and brings home dinner basically every time he comes.
Bringing home the fish. But, bringing home the bacon, I think that's the big question for most families. Beyond the payment you can receive, these towns also offer, relocation seminars, personal coaches to help you integrate. But at the end of the day, I think families are just going to have to decide, does this make sense for us long-term financially?
Really fascinating story. Michelle Stockman, our DW News Asia reporter, thanks so much for breaking that down for us. And earlier I spoke with sociologist Dr. Yuka Minagawa at Sophia University in Tokyo, and I asked her if this could be a sustainable solution to some of Japan's long-term demographic problems. She pointed out some potential issues with the government scheme.
So this new policy of providing 1 million Japanese yen per child for a family moving to a new place, to a remote area, is based on a one-time payment, right? One-time cash payment of 1 million yen. But apparently that is not going to address the long-term needs that a family will face, such as cost for education and living expenses. So what needs to be done instead, I believe, is to take a long-term strategy to raise a salary, to lower the living expenses, including cost for education, and to provide more opportunities for education and employment in rural areas.
Japan, as you've hinted there, is facing some real pressures, particularly when it comes to demography, ageing populations, a low fertility rate, too many people living in Tokyo, not enough people living in rural areas. Talk to us about why Japan is at this point right now.
There are three types for demographers. There are three types of internal migration. That one is I-type, I-curve of migration, meaning that someone is born in one place and moving to another place, never to return. The second type is sort of like a U-curve, that someone was born in one place, moving around, but eventually come back to where he or she was born. And the third type is called J-shape migration, meaning that someone was born in one place but keep moving, never to return to where he or she is from. So what we currently observe is this increase of sort of I-turn and a J-turn. And the problem is that the destination of these internal migrations tend to be concentrated in large cities, namely Tokyo, because these places offer greater opportunities for education and employment. And according to the latest census of 2020, about 30% of the entire population resided in Tokyo and its adjacent prefectures, suggesting that about 1/3 of the population is concentrated in the Tokyo area. So the real problem is that the destination of internal migration tends to be in large cities because it's got more opportunities.
Okay, understand. And I guess perhaps a lot of women are moving from rural areas into Tokyo in search of employment and better opportunities, and perhaps choosing to not have children for whichever reason. What are some of these reasons that perhaps women in Japan are deciding that having children might not be for them?
Right. So Japan is currently facing this another very important key challenge of lower birth rate. And there are so many factors contributing to low birth rates in Japan among women in Japan. But the one important contributor is educational attainment among young women. So highly educated women tend to postpone childbirth or marriage per se. So that partly explains that this Japan's lower birth rate. So higher education increases in women's education, therefore increases in women's participation in labor force.
I'd like to shift focus slightly finally, Doctor, and ask you, of course, about the one issue in the last few years that's affected everybody around the world, and that is the pandemic. How has the pandemic affected people's attitudes to things like work-life balance and perhaps being more open to live somewhere that isn't a big city?
So the hurdles, the barriers for relocation to remote areas have largely declined during the COVID-19 pandemic because the options of remote work have become more available and the locations of work have become less important. So that's one positive aspect. But as I said earlier, when it comes to relocation, it's really the challenge is to find the employment that allow them to work remotely, and particularly for two adults in one household, that's really a big challenge. So finding the one job for one person is not enough if family really decides to move to relocate to a remote area. So finding employment, finding jobs for two persons in a one household is a real challenge.
Certainly a big challenge, as you say. That was social demographer Dr. Yuka Minagawa there in Tokyo. We'd really like to thank you for your time and your insights today.
Thank you.